I wanted to get into a few college football notes here. We don't talk a ton of college football. I will say in 2023 and 2024, year to date, I've probably watched more college football than I had in, call it like the previous decade combined. I the college. I used to be a nerd for college football. Knew all the players. I was the one who, with NCAA football, I would buy. I think at one point it was the memory card, and then once it was PS2. Once you could connect to the internet, you could like download the data. But I was the one who was like, no, I gotta have the names of the players, right? Like number 5 for USC, I need the game to be telling me that's Reggie Bush, not number 5. So very much into college football as I was growing up. And then, kind of just became more NFL centric, just NFL tunnel vision as I got older and in college, and then certainly in the real world. Sundays in college those were sometimes the days that you weren't feeling the greatest. So laying around on the couch watching football. We actually had a couple of TVs in the apartment that I lived in. So this was like we didn't have Red Zone there, but we could watch like the Fox game and the CBS game at the same time. So really just gravitated to the NFL and have been there ever since. It's just, I find it easier to keep up to date, keep track of the players, the storylines, like just the personalities around the league. But I'm also aware that, college football is massive. You could say it's the second largest sport in the country, following the NFL. So I don't watch all the games, but I would say Colorado brought me back into it last year with what they've got going on with Dion and just the uniqueness of that circumstance. It's like you've got 2 top 5 draft picks, but a program that for the most part has never, in the mid 90s, Colorado, that was like their heyday. Michael Westbrook, Salam, Cordell Stewart, right? They had a lot of big time names back then, but for the most part, they've been irrelevant for 30 plus years. So the idea, and it's just, again, a little bit of I can't think of a precedent where you've got the best player in college football, potentially the Heisman Trophy winner in Travis Hunter, and a quarterback who is easily going to go in the top 5, probably going to be the top quarterback off the board. Yet they've kind of flown under the radar this year. Last year was a different story, but this year, they're sitting at 8-2. They are, if the season ended today, they would be playing for the Big 12 championship. Now, there's still 2 games left. Anything can happen. It's college football. It's part of the excitement. But I think Colorado is dramatically better than they were in 2023. And I don't just mean from a record standpoint. Obviously, when you're sitting at 8-2 versus, I think last year at this point through 10 games, they were 4-6. So clearly much better in the wins-losses column. They were ranked number 17 coming into today. And I just think that, I'm watching the game, and it struck me that this game against Utah, even though Utah is not what certainly they expected the season to be and not what they've been in recent years, they come in at 4-5, but they are a legit program. Now, they've had a lot of bad luck at the quarterback position. Cam Rising, really a shame. that guy was really, really good. And it just feels like ever since he suffered the injury against Penn State, I think it was Penn State, a couple of years ago in the Rose Bowl, he left that game early. Utah ends up losing. He's just, feels like he's never played. Now, I know he did come back last year, and if I have that right, maybe I'm not exactly brushed up. Like I told you, not digging too deep into the college game, but I had thought Cam Rising was healthy at one point over these past couple of years, and it just feels like Injury after injury, it's just one setback after another. But Colorado is a legit program. So for them, to come in and what I'm talking about in terms of Colorado this year versus Colorado last year, they are winning games that last year they would have lost. I thought today was a perfect example. You have a real program coming in, throw out the record, forget that they're 4-5. They are a real program. Kyle Whittingham is a good coach, and Colorado was really sloppy today. There were multiple points in that game that could have been sudden changes and just completely turned the tide. And last year, I think it would have, right? You have no Jimmy Horn. Shedeur fumbles inside his own red zone in the first half. It only ends up leading to a field goal. It's 14-3. He fumbles. It just looked like he took his eyes off it, dropped the snap. Colorado holds Utah to a field goal, so it's 14-6. Travis Hunter gave up his first touchdown catch of the season. And then you had that end of the third quarter sequence where, going into the commercial, it looked like, wow, Colorado just hit for a big gain. Sanders to Travis Hunter. We go to a commercial. And then you come back from the commercial, and that completion is wiped off. They said, upon further review, that Sanders actually did not get the snap off prior to the end of the quarter. And you're looking at that going, wait a second. Because then they started the fourth with 2 negative plays. And now you're going, they were about to extend the lead, and now it's 3rd and long, and they're going to have to punt this thing back to Utah? Are we headed towards another kind of late game collapse? But no, because this is not 2023. Shedeur throws the touchdown to Miller on 3rd and long. Colorado pretty much, never looks back from that standpoint. They end up doubling them up. I think the final ended up being 49-24 today. But the sloppiness that I just mentioned, if those plays happen last year, I think you could say it's very possible Utah comes away with this thing with a win. And when you look back to 2023, they started off with a bang. And I think it clouded reality. It distorted how good I think we all thought they were versus what reality was. They started off 3-0. Now, at that point in time, if you put yourself back at the beginning of 2023, and I want to say it was week 0, it felt like it was one of those weeks, and I believe that they call it week 0 in college, where it's not a full slate of games, but you have a few games. And when Deion took over at Colorado, when he was hired, and when he brought all the guys from Jackson State, both of his sons, Travis Hunter, there were some other guys too that came along. There was a lot of shit people were talking on how serious is he, what's the legitimate chances of this thing being successful. And Deion being Deion, right? Confidence is his thing. He was pretty adamant in saying, look, this is going to be a legitimate program. We are going to turn this thing around. Colorado was dreadful the year before, but TCU, even though TCU ended up really not being a good team in 2023, the reality is that first game when Colorado went into Fort Worth, TCU was coming off of a season in which they were the national runner-up. Now, they got embarrassed in the championship game against Georgia in SoFi, but they beat Michigan in the semifinals, and they were, everyone's looking at that game going, it's TCU, it's the national runner-up. They are going to demolish Colorado. And you have to give the Buffaloes credit. They went in there, they went blow for blow with TCU, and they come out of there with a win. And then in the second game, they crushed Nebraska at home. And in the third game, that was the Colorado State game, they got out to an early lead, The momentum really changed on the cheap shot on Travis Hunter, which ultimately knocked him out of the game and would force him to miss the next few games. But they battled back. Colorado State took the lead in the second half. Colorado was basically playing from behind the entire second half. They could not stop. I forget who it was, number 10 or number 17, the wide receiver from Colorado State was just owning them in that game. And they end up winning that. They go to 3-0. And I think at that point, there was just this completely unnecessary, unrealistic expectation that, you had people talking about them as a playoff team. And it's like, no, they are not a playoff team. I remember at the time talking to some people who were super hype about it. And I was like, yeah, I think maybe 6-6. And they looked at me like I was crazy. Like, have you not watched the last few weeks? And it's like, yeah, actually I have been watching. And they're the ones, like I mentioned at the top here, kind of brought me back into being interested in college football. And there was just no way when you watch them play that they were going to be a playoff team, much less a 9-10 win team. But I thought last year they get off to that big start. They then get destroyed at Oregon, which wasn't a surprise. The USC game, they got beat pretty badly in that one too. Now the final score did not indicate that. That one, I want to say it was like 49-42 or 48-41. It was a touchdown that separated them. If you watched the game, it was never that close. USC just jumped all over them, and then much like we saw USC do throughout the year last year and the year before that, for that matter, was just give up a bunch of points, which made the final score look better than what the game actually was. And then they beat Arizona State, because I want to say that was a road game. Kenny Dillingham, Arizona State coach, who, by the way, they're cooking this year, but they beat ASU, and I think that's what put them at 4-2. And then I remember it was a Friday night game. They're playing Stanford at home, and they're up, I want to say 4 touchdowns in the first half. I think it was either like 28-0, 29-0, or maybe Stanford had a field goal, but it was just like game on. They may put up 50 points in this thing. And then the second half, completely different ball game. Stanford, much like in that Colorado State game, I can't remember the kid's name, but Stanford had a receiver who Colorado just had no answers for. Hunter was not playing in that game, as I mentioned. I think the injury back in the Colorado State game kept him out of that. But they could not stop Stanford's number 1 wide receiver. He was putting up video game numbers. So they go from dominating that game, looking like they should win by 40 to 50 points, to losing. Then they played a relatively close game at UCLA. Remember, that was the game where everyone got their shit stolen, all their jewelry was taken from the locker room while the game was going on. I mean, now, not to get off path here, but how does that happen in a major college football game? Like, people just randos have access to the visiting locker room at the Rose Bowl? Weird situation. They then played a close game at Arizona. They lose that one. And the Oregon State game, they had them at home. Oregon State, much better team than Colorado last year, but they had a chance in that one too, and they lost that. So, they start 3-0. They drop 2 games to Oregon and SC, who are clearly, they were just better than them talent-wise. That put them at 3-2. They win against Arizona State, 4-2, and then they just drop the next 4. And I thought once you hit that stretch, there was no coming back from that. And ultimately, they finished 4-8. So you start 3-0, and then you go 1-8 to finish the season. But this year, different story. They're playing legitimate defense. Now, their struggles last year were largely on the offensive and defensive lines. I would not say that has been dramatically improved. I would say the defensive line is better than last year's defensive line. The offensive line is still really suspect. Shedeur Sanders got lit up last year. And to a large extent, he's getting hit a lot this year. Now, some of that, right, is he does a lot, and he's clearly very comfortable doing it. He does a lot of kind of running around, buying time, and it just seems like, imagine being an offensive lineman for Colorado when, sometimes Shedeur's back there for like 7, 8+ seconds before he lets go of the football. That's a lot. That's a long time to be blocking, especially defensive ends who are typically faster and more athletic. So again, the offensive line is not great, but it is better compared to last year. I do think the defensive line, if you look at the two units, the improvement or the steps forward the defensive line has taken outdoes that of their offensive line this year. But yeah, I think they are clearly a better team than they were last year. And I thought it was the proper perspective you got after the game during the on-field interviews with Sanders and Travis Hunter. Both guys just, they kind of said what it was. They could play a lot better as a team. They believe they will play better, which that means a lot coming from, a couple of guys who are shoo-ins to be top 5 draft picks. They're already making money in NIL, but that's going to really turn up when they are in the National Football League. And to have the perspective and be grounded enough to recognize, you crushed this team. You scored damn near 50 points, but there was a lot that could have been cleaned up, and we'll see if it gets cleaned up. They have Kansas next week, and then they finish the regular season with Oklahoma, and then the Big 12 championship, which right now looks like it's going to be against BYU. I actually think they got a little bit of a break with Kansas going into Provo. Give Kansas a lot of credit. They came in, I want to say they were 3-6 going into the game Saturday night against BYU, and they held their own. They win that game. Usually what you see is the underdog scores an upset at home, right? High-ranked team comes in, night game, your people are going wild, and you ultimately win that game, and then it's followed up with like a noon kickoff on the road, and you fall back to earth. It's actually the opposite in Kansas's case. The Jayhawks go in there, win that game against BYU, and now they host Colorado next week. So we'll see what the energy's like for the Jayhawks. But, this will be the second straight game now where they have a chance to, knock off one of the powers in the conference, or a ranked team. But I do think it benefits Colorado that Kansas went in there and played the game they did against BYU. But really impressive performance. Been a great season from Colorado. And we'll see how things go down the stretch here. Kansas at BYU was a great way to end the action on Saturday night. You have BYU undefeated, very much in the playoff mix, potentially even a bye week in the playoffs. So they had a lot to play for. Kansas Jayhawks, not so much. They came in at 3-6. They were essentially playing for the ability to get back. They have 2 more games left. To get back to 500 and make themselves bowl eligible. But you got to give Kansas a ton of credit. Jalen Daniels, the quarterback, not to be confused with Jaden Daniels, former LSU quarterback, now plays for the Commanders. I thought he was awesome. He handled, he never seemed to get rattled. Now, he didn't play a perfect game by any means, but to go in there as a big underdog when your season has not gone the way you had hoped, you've lost 6 games, you're playing against a team that hasn't lost any games, and Provo is I've never been there personally, but from everything you've seen on television and what you hear from people who have been on hand, that place is rocking on a Saturday night. They go in there, they knock off BYU, they end BYU's bid for an undefeated season, and at this point, BYU has no chance to get a bye should they get into the college playoff. Right now, it's looking like BYU and Colorado will face off in the Big 12 championship. Now, there's still a couple of games to go. The Big 12 is actually pretty interesting right now because you've got, really 4 teams vying for the potential to play in the Big 12 championship game. BYU and Colorado lead the conference at 6-1 in conference play. Now BYU is 9-1 overall. Colorado's 8-2. But then you have Arizona State and Iowa State, who are both 5-2 in the conference and 8-2 overall. So a lot to play for. A lot of stuff can happen, different scenarios here. Colorado actually plays at Kansas next week. So, if the Jayhawks, I think it's a very low probability, but if somehow they were able to pull off another upset victory, that changes things within the conference and potentially the conference championship game. Colorado finishes with Oklahoma State, who I think that one, not to be a look-ahead game, but I actually think the Oklahoma State game is going to be the tougher one for Colorado. That's a real program. Gundy is a good college football coach. So for Colorado to make it to the Big 12 championship, they're going to have to beat both of these teams. But going back to Kansas and BYU, one of the things that just made my blood boil, and I'm not a fan, like I talked about at the top of the episode, I don't really watch a ton of college football, but that play in the first half, it was on BYU's first touchdown drive. There was a terrible, horrendous, whatever synonym you want to use, awful spot on the play where the wide receiver Kingston, he came on like an end around, and they called it on the field a first down. It was third down. They gave him the first down. Kingston, if he's the guy, I believe, I want to say I saw him on SportsCenter earlier this year. He had that crazy punt return. Kind of has the long blonde hair flying out of the back of the helmet. Gives off like Cole Beasley vibes. But the scenario was it was third down. So who knows if it ended up going to fourth and short, which it should have been. Maybe BYU picks it up anyway. But the point is, you have to get these calls correct. And he takes the handoff, he runs to, if you were watching on TV, like the top of the screen. So like most football broadcasts, you're kind of looking at it, the field's going left to right. He gets the end around, and he gets pushed out of bounds on the top of the screen. So you obviously don't have an overhead view of it, and I don't know, I can't remember if any of the replays actually showed an overhead view. But even real time, I'm thinking, like in my mind, I'm like, I wonder if BYU is going to go for this on fourth, or, I forget where they were on the field. It would have been a long field goal. So, I'm like, are they going to try to kick this long field goal? Are they going to go for it? Would they perhaps maybe even like pooch punt it? But the reason I thought that was clearly the dude was out of bounds, well short of the line to gain. And if I could see that real time, looking from an angle that was not ideal for actually determining when he went out of bounds, that's how you know just how far away from the first down marker he was. And on the broadcast, even the commentators were questioning it. BYU is lining up for the next play because they called it a first down on the field, and they stopped the play, or they stopped, BYU from snapping the ball. They go to a review. And I thought replay after replay shows he is at minimum 1 yard short, if not more. I actually think it was probably closer to 1.5 yards that it should have been. But then the refs come out and they confirm the call on the field. First down BYU. Like, how do you... One, I understand if you've ever been on like field level in a Division I college football game or an NFL game, it is hard to describe without you actually being there yourself just how fast these guys are moving, how fast the action is. So I'm not going to crush the refs for, even though I thought it was pretty clearly well short watching it real speed. They're on the field. They have a little bit of a different angle. So I'm not going to kill them over getting that or calling it a first down initially. But the whole point of replay and all this technology and going to the review is to make sure you get the damn call right. So to review that when it clearly, he steps out of bounds, the ball is in his right hand. Even if you don't have a clear angle or like a sky cam view, the idea that you watch that and still say, yeah, he got there, first down, that was dog shit. Like, you have to make more accurate calls than that. And I'm all for game flow. Like, I do not like, whether it's football and basketball, it's really annoying. And even baseball, I don't like when the game gets stopped multiple times for the referees to go to the replay and determine what actually happened. But there's a lot of money on these games, whether it's the gambling aspect, whether it's the college football playoff, standings within the conference, people's jobs, right? Depending on wins and losses, that could be the difference between, coaches coming back or not, right? And then their staffs. Now, I don't think that's the case, right, with BYU, but my point is, we have the technology available to us. The rules are the rules. So if you are going to have to stop the game, get the damn call right. They inexplicably give them the first down. BYU ends up scoring on that drive. And I'm thinking, Kansas, when you're going for an upset bid, you kind of need everything to go right. And to get jobbed on a clear bad spot, even if BYU, right, like, who knows what happens on fourth down, right? If they have a yard and a half to go, what if they fumble the snap and the quarterback has to jump on it? Or what if they try to run it up the middle and they get stuffed, right? Now you've got even more momentum from Kansas. And it just changes the complexion of the game. And I give them credit, because when you are trying as a much inferior team, much less on the road, to go in and pull off the upset, to do that and overcome shit officiating, or at least a shitty spot on the out of bounds play there, Kansas deserves a lot of credit. They did not let that rattle them. They continued to play well. They ultimately, it was a really good game, really entertaining, and Kansas comes away with the victory. So, give them credit. Going to Provo Saturday night, they knock off the undefeated Cougars, and now they've got Colorado at home up next. USC beat Nebraska to get back to 5-5 on the season. Goes without saying, the Trojans being 5-5, this was not expected. This is an abysmal season relative to expectations around this program. They get back to 500. Now they close out with UCLA and Notre Dame. They need to win at least one of those to become bowl eligible. It's hard to see that W being Notre Dame. So if they don't beat UCLA, things are looking pretty bleak. But whether they become bowl eligible or not, this thing has been a failure. This is Lincoln Riley's third season with the program, and they have somehow become progressively worse as the years have gone on. He comes here in 2022, brings Caleb Williams coming off of his true freshman year at Oklahoma with him. And to his credit, he dominates offensively at least. Caleb Williams wins the Heisman Trophy. And overall, though, they just weren't that good, right? They ended up, I forget what bowl game it was. I want to say it was indoors somewhere. I don't know if it was in Dallas or San Antonio, the Alamo Bowl, or, New Orleans. But I remember they played Tulane and they lost the bowl game because they could not stop the Green Wave. And that was just an omen of how things were going to go at SC. Lincoln brought Alex Grinch with him from Oklahoma, and it was about as bad defensively as you could have expected. Again, because Oklahoma couldn't stop anybody. It was a very curious decision to bring a defensive coordinator with you to a new program when that defense was not good at the previous stop. And, in the Big 12, it almost seemed like it was just kind of accepted. It's like, well, they're good on offense. Lincoln's an offensive wizard. And so, yeah, if they win 45-31, so be it, right? Nobody's going to second guess it. But they just, you weren't going to get away with that in the Pac-12. And now that you're in the Big 10, you're even more exposed. So they ended up firing Alex Grinch mid-season last year, but it's kind of more of the same this year. They cannot stop anybody. And I'm a big believer in the team assumes the identity of the head coach. And Lincoln's identity, let's be real about it, it's score a lot of points on offense. We don't really give a shit about what's going on special teams. And we're certainly not super dialed in on what's going on defense. So, there was a sequence, and this to me was, whether it's Alex Grinch, whether it's D'Anton Lynn, this summed up, I thought, what SC, at least defensively, has been since Lincoln Riley arrived. There was a sequence on the second Nebraska touchdown drive in the first half when they tied it at 14, when on multiple third downs, Nebraska just breezed their way to easy third and long conversions. I mean, they were not even sweating it. And that goes back to, like I said, the identity of the team, what it feels like, what the head coach's energy is. To be in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10, and just being like, well, we're just going to dial up, a play that seems like it should work, and we're just going to assume it does, because why wouldn't it? This team is clearly unable to stop us on 3rd down, especially 3rd down and long. There was like back-to-back 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10s that Nebraska just easily converted. No panic, just, well, here's the play, let's get it. And then on the touchdown on that drive, Raiola throws a short pass where I think it was to a running back who caught it. I can't remember, but he throws a short pass, and the defensive back is literally on the heels of the receiver. And I'm thinking, okay, 3 or 4 yard gain here on first down. And the defensive back does not dive and try to make a play. He just continues to try to run down the guy in a foot race and doesn't come close and makes no effort, right? There's no desperation. There's no, oh shit, this guy is going to get out of my grasp. I better dive and grab his ankle and bring him down here to, minimize the yardage gained. And to me, that comes down to the attitude and, like I said, the identity of the team, and that is formed in college football by the head coach. So, as far as the coaching goes, this just feels like an extension of the Oklahoma teams, where Lincoln's doing a lot of X's and O's and working with the offense and scheming it up to get yards and get points, but there's no urgency on the defensive side of the football. And one thing I would say, compared to Oklahoma, there is no reason why in Southern California you don't have, right, like Lincoln's an X's and O's guy on offense. You need Jimmys and Joes on defense. I don't care what your defensive scheme is, how creative it is, how much it confuses the opposing quarterback. You have to have the players. And it is surprising to me that in year 3, USC is just not where they need to be on the defensive side of the football. And I don't think this is an issue. I've heard a lot of people say, well, Lincoln Riley doesn't really feel like SoCal. He's a fish out of water. This is not a guy who, it bleeds USC. It's like, well, who does, bro? Because let's be real. When USC was you hear the term used all the time in college sports, especially in football and basketball, the blue bloods, right? The brand names. USC's glory days when, Marcus Allen was a star, that was a completely different time in the sports landscape, right? USC was viewed as an elite program, and I'm not talking about the resurgence that they had during the Pete Carroll years, right? I mean, clearly they were head and shoulders above most programs in the country. But if you go back to like the 70s and the early 80s, it's like college football was bigger than the NFL in that era. So whether it's Marcus Allen or Mike Garrett or whoever, those days were 30, 40 years ago. That's not where college football is today. So when you hear people say, well, get back to the glory days or, Lincoln, it's like, yeah, I know Lincoln is not John Robinson. I get it. But in terms of the identity, here's what matters for the identity. I don't give a shit whether it's Southern Cal, whether it's, insert program XYZ. All the fan base cares about, can you win games? Whether that's 45-38 or 21-17, do you win games? And right now, Southern California, under Lincoln Riley's leadership, they are not a winning program. They are on thin ice to even make a bowl game this year. But if you would have said at the beginning of the year, the goal for Southern Cal is to make a bowl game, that would have been unacceptable. The reality is they're paying Lincoln a massive amount of money. He's not going anywhere. And when I hear people talk about, well, like, oh, what's going on? What do they think of him? USC is not like pretty much any other college program in the country, right? Whether you're talking LSU, Michigan, Florida, Penn State, Ohio State, you name it. They are in a massive media market where college football really only matters if you are good. Ask Pete. When he was at SC, he took them from complete irrelevance to they are the best thing going in the market. Los Angeles is a Lakers town. It is a Dodgers town. The Clippers, for 4 or 5 years, had a nice run with Lob City. they never overtook the Lakers, even when the Lakers were shitty. Like, the Clippers were really, really good, while the Lakers were really bad, and it didn't matter. And the Dodgers, outside of 2020 and this year, obviously, when they won the World Series, their MO was make it to the postseason. You got a high payroll, you got a star players all over the field, and you don't get anything done. Yet, we're still in that place of Lakers, Dodgers, and then everybody else is a distance. The Rams won the Super Bowl a few years ago, and they are still kind of an afterthought in the market. Even though last year, right, they go to the playoffs. This year, they certainly have a chance at the playoffs. They have a great young coach in McVay. They've got probably a Hall of Fame quarterback in Matt Stafford. But that's not what captivates the attention of the market. So when people are up in arms, and I have a lot of people back east and even in like the South and some of the Midwest, some folks I know who are like, oh my goodness, you think they're going to fire Lincoln Riley? No, I don't, because they paid him a massive amount of money to come in and get the program back to prominence. That has not happened up to this point. The highlight has been he got Caleb Williams a Heisman Trophy, and to Lincoln's credit, Baker Mayfield won a Heisman Trophy at Oklahoma. Kyler Murray won a Heisman Trophy. He had 1 year with Jalen Hurts in which he didn't win the Heisman Trophy, but he was a finalist. And then Caleb Williams' true freshman year at Oklahoma, he didn't win the Heisman at OU, but Lincoln goes to USC, brings Caleb Williams with him, and then he wins a Heisman there. So there is no doubt, not a shred of doubt in my mind that Lincoln is a great offensive coach and knows what the hell he's doing with these quarterbacks. But the reality is they brought you in here to win. That has not happened. Like, they didn't bring you in here to have you get your quarterback's Heisman trophies. That's nice. That's icing on the cake. But when you're losing 4 or 5, probably 6+ games this year, that is not what the the athletic department brought you in to do. Now, the difference with SC is, unlike those other schools I mentioned, the pressure is not really even so much from the fan base. You know, you look at like the SEC and they are calling for guys' jobs. It's a little ridiculous, right? But they're calling for guys' jobs if they lose a game or two. I would say the internal pressures at SC far outweigh whatever the fan base pressures might be. So in other words, it's not like you have a bunch of people in Los Angeles clamoring for they have to move on. They got to make a change. Lincoln Riley needs to be fired. That's not the case. But right now, given what his contract is, given what the buyout would be, and anytime you call for someone's firing, it's like, well, who the hell are you hiring? Because if SC fired Lincoln and was like, well, we're just going to eat the money, who are you bringing in to replace him? That would be my question. And I think as bad as it's been, as really disappointing as it's been, we are probably another year or two of this kind of performance away from that even being in the discussion. So Lincoln's going to be there for the foreseeable future. Whether or not he can get the guys in, starting with the quarterback, right? I mean, Miller Moss is not the answer, but if he can get the guys in that he needs to run his scheme and be capable of winning 10 or 11 games to have a chance at the playoffs, that remains to be seen. Disappointing year, really disappointing couple of years, But the talk about are they going to replace Lincoln Riley or they should fire him. I just don't see that. So rough season if you're a Trojans fan, but I don't see any changes coming really anytime soon.